Hey guys, I am so excited for today's guest. It was something that's been a long time in the making. I actually can't believe she hasn't been on the show years ago. I'm not sure how we missed that, but here we are, and God's timing is always perfect. Paige is one of those friends that you see like when you're in a space, and this is always what happens to us when we're at similar conferences unknowingly. It's like we see each other, we connect, we're like, I see you, girl, keep going. But we don't necessarily need to stand there and like riff and take up each other's times when we know we're also meant to connect. And Paige, I just have always appreciated that about you. I love hugging your neck because it just brings such security, but also like you see me in those moments so well. And I'm just so grateful to have you on the show today so that I can hoard your time and you can hoard mine in the best way.
I'm so excited to be here. And like you said, it's been a while in the making, and I can't wait to talk. And the neck hug is especially true because I'm so short. Like all hugs for me are like not neck hugs. Like it just happens, and I'm okay with
It's
it.
true. Yeah, but they're so tender. They're so sweet. And I know that like you're literally putting yourself in that position with purpose. I know how sometimes you can get like the side hug or like any of those, like you give such a mama bear hug. And I'm always so appreciative of it.
That makes my heart sing because that's what I try to do.
Well, the trying doesn't happen. It's natural. So let's get into this conversation. It's going to bless so many people today. And before we got on camera, I was just asking Paige, like, is there anything specific that you want to talk about that I am like either unaware of or is new information or something God has like just really recently laid on your heart? And I know the richness that's going to come from this conversation. So I really want to dive right in because it's the topic of friendship. And it's also the topic of intimacy around physical touch and sexualization. So like, boom,
Yeah.
we're going to drop it hot. Like you guys are like, whoa, where does all of that align to? But I want to get into the Paige that is the writer, the speaker, the one that the Lord has really like captured your heart to be able to talk about some of these rich conversations. Let's go there first, and then we'll kind of go down those rabbit holes.
Yeah, let's do it. And funny enough, if you look back over kind of like the past year, I was like a little MIA. Like
Mhm.
very specifically last December, God was like, "You're gonna stop everything. Like you're gonna hit
Mm.
pause." And I was like, okay, like I started to feel a little burned out, but like I was like, I can keep going.
Right.
And then turns out January, February of this year, I was actually diagnosed bipolar. And so that led me down this entire like journey of kind of figuring all of that out, figuring out
Yeah.
medication and my care team and everything like that. I was like, ah, God, I see you, God. Like we're
Yes,
doing
he's
that.
so good. Yeah, he's so intentional.
Right. And so, yeah, this past year has been like a big pause for me, but I'm like just starting to like break into things back again. So the writing, the speaking, the podcasting, it's all happening, and it's all happening fast, which I love,
Yeah.
and doing all that. And I also work full time. A lot of people I don't think
I
they see
didn't
me
know
online.
that.
Oh yeah. I have a full-time job.
What do you do in
I'm a
that
social
time?
media manager
Okay,
in-house
I knew you
at
did
a
social.
company.
I guess I just always thought that was yours. You wear it
Yeah.
so beautifully that you serve
Thank
other
you.
people.
I mean, I do that too. I
Yeah.
mean,
You do all the
y
things. Okay, the side
I'm
hustle
talking
and the
to the
full-time
queen
gig.
of, like, multiple hats here as well. I
It's true.
also wear multiple hats. So while I, like, freelance and consult for social media and digital marketing, that's, like, what I get paid for full
Right.
time to do.
Right. Okay, the double whammy. That makes total sense then. I love that. I wanna know as you've kind of entered back into that, because I've actually walked through some health experiences this year too, unexpectedly, specifically around, Hashimoto's, and I was diagnosed
Mhm.
with Hashimoto's earlier this year, which is a thyroid situation. I
Yeah,
don't like to like just probably like you don't like I don't necessarily wear it as a badge of honor,
right.
but it is something that we have to be mindful of and get education around and all of these things. And so I've been really combating a lot of fatigue and things that have always worked for me in my body are not currently working for me in my body.
Right.
So as you've entered back into like this realm of capacity and this new speed and adding these other things back to your plate that have been passion projects, how have you felt? What has that problem or process or even like that tension been like for you?
Yeah. It was really funny because, last year, when I was in, like, full speed, when I was,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
pushing everything,
Uh-huh.
people would always tell me, and I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, but people would always tell me, "Paige, you do so much. How do you
Mhm.
do it all?" Just because I have
Mhm.
a lot on my plate. And I would always look at them and say, "But I could do more."
Mm. Wow.
And looking back, I'm like, "Ooh, I was, like, a little bit manic." Like, that's, like, the definition of, like, mania, uh, with, like, always being able to do more and
Right,
pushing, and then, like, you push, push,
right.
push, and then you crash. Um,
Mhm.
but I didn't know it at the time, like, I just thought, like,
Yep.
"No, I just have, like, more capacity than, like, I think, and I can keep going,"
So sounds
and
like
really at
me.
the time, like, I believed it. I was like, "Yeah, but I'm not, like, really working that hard. Like, I'm doing things, but I'm not, like, really doing them. Like, I could
Yes.
be doing more." And so, kind of coming back from that, I'm, like, very, aware of my personal bandwidth and not taking on too much and knowing that like my default is to push a little bit harder.
Mhm.
And so that is something that I've been very aware of, that I've worked very hard to not let happen. And just like also knowing the warning signs for like,
Sure.
hey, I might be entering a manic episode. And if that happens, like these are the things that I do to take care of that.
Yeah.
Hopefully, as, like, my medication, like, works out, I'll start to even keel, and, like, my my psychologist, I love her so much, she's like, "These episodes should be happening, like, once and twice a year, not once and twice a month." And I was like, "Hey, like, we're still working on that." So
I'm
is
trying, I'm trying.
but, like, to your point, this is something that I'm, like, hugely passionate
Yeah.
about, is, like, not taking it on as my identity.
So good.
Because I have a lot of other health issues
Yeah.
that I could wear as my badge, and
Yeah.
I know some people, maybe they find, like, camaraderie around it,
Yeah.
but I just that's not my identifier, and it
Mm.
never will be. Also, why, like, not a lot of people know my job is because, like, that's not my identifier
Yeah.
in my life,
So
is not
good.
what I do.
Yeah, that's so good. And I want to think for people who are watching now live, hi, we see you, and or you are listening to this later. We want to hear this from you. Like, has this become a part of your identity? And it's okay if it is, but it's a awareness factor of that, and it's a searching of self because it really isn't. Like that was never God's intention for us to experience these things. And I know it's hard for people, especially when it comes to health. You're like, well, sin didn't make me have Hashimoto's. Well, it kind of did. If you look back at like the fall of mankind and you follow and trace like the environmental factors and all these other things that are going on, they wouldn't be in God's garden. Like that's not was never his intention. And so while God will
Mhm.
see us through those things and he'll provide medication to be able to do it, he'll provide solace to be able to do it, he'll give us peace that transcends all understanding, all of the things that he is still. And yet we're experiencing these I can definitely align to some of the things you were saying from time capacity perspective. I'm like raising my hand, like, oh my gosh, I'm so guilty of this, and it's always the thing that people talk to me about. How do you do all those things? And I really do see myself like I just don't think I'm actually doing any of them to the level of excellence that I could if I well, I don't want to say pushed harder, but showed up more. And I felt like I do have that there's moments where I'm like, I think I'm actually being lazy, but I love that you think I'm doing 1,000 things. So as you're processing this for yourself, what are now the red flags or what are the boundary pieces? Because burnout and adrenal fatigue are another thing that are on my topic of my conversation, front of my thoughts on a regular basis now.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanna say one thing before I get to
Yes.
that. Someone told me this, like, just a few weeks ago, and I've
Yeah.
been, like, chewing on it and loving it so much because it is so true. He said, hardworking people always think they're lazy, that's why they work hard."
Mm,
I was like,
mhm.
"Oh," like, that kinda, like, hit me
Yeah.
real deep there, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, that's why we push and we strive, is because, like, we really think we're lazy." At least that's super true to me because I was
But
like,
then
"Yeah, I'm, like,
what do you do with that
lazy."
though? Because so then the lazy person just doesn't recognize that they're lazy and they just are like living their best life.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
so do we allow ourselves I mean, this is interesting. I'm like
Yeah.
processing loud. Do we then allow ourselves to be lazy because we're children, right? And we're children of God and that there's a little bit of that that's okay. That's an interesting thing. I'm gonna have to sit with it too.
Yeah, yeah. Full circle though comes back to
Okay.
our like my triggers and like being super aware of like
Yes.
what is happening. And like I'll be like really honest here
Yeah.
because I had this conversation just last week at the young adults group that that I work at, volunteer at, excuse
Yeah.
me. And I was like talking, and I just wanted the gal I was talking to feel really safe to talk about like the very real circumstances around like bipolar and like mania
Yeah.
and depression and like what happens, because I could say like I'm really sad or I don't feel like getting out of bed, and while all those things are true, let's also go to the extreme and know the thoughts that are going on in my head, which still happen. And they don't happen as much, they don't happen as frequently, but they
Right.
still happen. um and some of the crazy thoughts, because this is why I got diagnosed with bipolar and not just like anxiety, depression,
Sure.
is like the extreme that the thoughts go to is
Mm.
like, that's why it took me 2.5 years to like really get a diagnosis. I
Yeah.
could pinpoint my first manic episode. Like
Sure.
I know the date it happened.
Yeah.
And that was like 2.5 years ago. um but it's the extreme, and I was talking to my doctor about these like extreme thoughts, and she's like, oh, like we need to get that checked out, because like
Yeah.
those thoughts are not normal, to the point where I told my husband to leave me. I told
Mhm.
him to go cheat on me. I told him I was going to go cheat on him. I told him he should just go sleep around. I told him
Mhm.
that I'm going to run away, like like being
Yeah.
100% honest. And it's
Painful.
not
Yeah.
being dramatic in the moment. I'm
Sure.
not being dramatic. He and I are not fighting in this moment. I'm not
Yeah.
telling him to like just go run off because I'm frustrated with him. That's just like the darkness
Mhm.
that finds me in those moments. And
Mm.
so I begin to understand, okay, when I have those thoughts, like this is what is happening. And now
Yeah.
that I have an awareness to it, it has helped me prepare for them a lot better
Sure.
and safeguard myself from any destructive behaviors,
Sure.
from anything that I know like my tendency is towards. And I get to just put the things in place that I get to do to keep me safe.
Yeah.
And then we wait till it to pass, and then we move forward.
Can I ask you a question? Because I know we haven't got to the
Of
other
course.
question, but I'm like, wait, this is so good. How have you, as a Christian, as a woman of God, how have you processed any of this as spiritual warfare? Because I know there's going to be plenty of people who are like, but this is just a demon. Like, can you
Yeah.
talk to us about like what have you processed in that regard? What kind of work have you done leaning into that knowledge or experience?
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say that there might not be a direct scripture to pull
Yeah.
from this, but from understanding the overarching of scripture and what it says about this is kind of the conclusion that I
Yeah.
came to when we talk about like demons and spiritual warfare
Yeah.
and things like that. Because I have been approached with that
Sure.
topic from other Christians, well, being so well meaning,
Yeah.
like they're not being like you're demon possessed
Yeah.
now, like there's
Sure.
that.
Sure.
But one thing that I learned, especially like listening to other people who like operate in this space a little bit more of like possession and like
Yeah.
Holy Spirit and spiritual warfare, is that when you are a Christian and a
Mhm.
Jesus follower, you are now the host of the Holy Spirit.
Mhm.
The Holy Spirit resides inside of you.
Mhm.
And if the Holy Spirit resides inside of you, that means that evil forces cannot be.
Yep.
They cannot be inside of you. And so while they like there might be external factors at play in terms of, playing with your mind, playing with the
Right.
situation, those things might be at play, but like internally, like I am like the Holy Spirit resides
Mhm.
in me.
Mhm.
And so that is why like I don't really worry too much
Right.
about like this demon possession kind of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
overtaking. I could be wrong,
Yeah.
but also that's where I land.
No, and I think that the conversation that she's alluding to, because I've had previous episodes around this conversation, this
Yeah.
idea of possession versus suppression, right?
Mm,
And that we live in a fallen world. So obviously the enemy is always going to be attacking, especially children of God, because you're on a mission and you're on his
Right.
mission for kingdom expansion. Yes, mindsets are going to be, tainted. You're going to have darkness that comes over in some scenario. And so I think that there is a healthy conversation of also understanding, like we were talking about, chemical imbalances,
Mhm.
mental health issues, things that we're walking through that are very real, but also like body suppression, just things that are happening environmentally that's scientific. And
Yeah.
so I love that like we're able to have a healthy conversation here about the both and
Mhm.
that's really where we're at in this place, is understanding that, yeah, there's spiritual things happening all the time, but there's also environmental things that are scientifically true. And that's where
Mhm.
we get to have, just as we were talking about tonsillectomies for my son, like there's
Yeah.
other things that are happening. I know God gave him his tonsils for a reason, but I also know that there are environmental things that have transpired that are outside of my control. And we have to understand that that manipulation has affected our health. And
Yeah.
so I am proud of you for saying yes and leaning in on all of the fronts that you have, which does take bravery and it does take education and it does take time. So thank God he gave you time to say pause all
Yeah.
of these other things to do that this year. And now we're in this next phase of like, welcome back to the party,
Right.
and let's see where this goes. I want to allude to someone who is live with us right now. Cameron asked the question, do you have a designated day of rest? Which kind of alludes to the conversation we were going into, is like, what are the warning flags? What are the boundaries? What do you do with the adrenal fatigue or the burnout phase, which is a conversation that's happening often as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I will be completely frank because I keep it 100. Right now is my busy season. I am
Yes.
preparing to on a book proposal right now, so I am busy, which means that I work every day after work and I work weekends.
Yeah.
And it's been that way for like a month and a half.
Okay.
Now, is that sustainable? No. Is that biblical? No, Paige. I'm talking to myself in
You're in
that.
the Sabbath.
Um,
Okay, thank you.
Right,
Yeah.
but one thing that, my husband and I try to do kind of outside the scope of, like, weird
Yes.
seasons,
Yes.
is, we do have a rest day, but also I have learned for myself, I can't add too many rules around my rest day,
Mm,
because that really starts to wear
yeah.
on me and, like, I know there's, like, legalism associated with that and
Yes.
all of that
Yep.
because there's the whole phrase, like, if you, work with your mind, rest with your hands. If you work with your hands, rest with your mind. It's one
Mm.
of my favorite
I've never
things.
heard this. I like it.
Really? Oh, it's one
No.
of my favorites. Yeah, so
It's
I'll say it
good.
again. If you work with your mind, rest with your hands. If you work with your hands, rest with your mind.
Ah, that's good. That's freeing.
So one thing that is really because I sit at a computer all day,
Yeah.
guess what? I probably like as much as I love to binge watch TV. We're working on Only Murders in the Building right now and British Bake Off. Those are our two.
Okay.
Um, but I love to be out in my garden. And
Yeah.
like, it's planting season right now for us. And if you look at your typical I'll just say some of like the Orthodox Jews who really abide by the rules of Sabbath and things like that, that would not be necessarily allowed.
Right.
And for me, working in my garden is very
Yeah.
healing. It is
Yeah.
very restful. And also, that's, where I get to encounter God. Same with like if I
Mm.
went on a hike or if I went outside, things that are really restful to my soul, beyond legalism,
Yeah.
is kind of
Good.
where I find my home base. So we don't have like a regular routine. We usually pick a day on the weekend,
Yeah.
whether Saturday or Sunday. We just say, hey, are we going to work today or are we going to be resting today?
Yeah. That's
And
good.
then we get to pick.
Yeah, and I think even having, obviously we have that same conversation, but throwing in the kiddos, and it's like everyone wants to go a different way, and so like I am in a season where I don't feel like the legalistic element of, okay, we always rest every Saturday. We do like a Friday night, you know, eat and hang out by the fire and have conversation and things like that, and then we sprinkle that through our weeks. And
Mm.
so I love my friends who have Sabbath. I'm like, tell me more. And I just believe that the Sabbath can also be a state of mind and a way in which you operate, and doing daily. Like there's daily moments where like people don't see what I do off camera. And
Right.
so the rest piece of, I love that with your hands versus your mind and how you then respond. Like, they don't obviously see me. I'm not like taking selfies in the bathtub or
Right.
reading, right? I'm not doing that. And people do. I just choose not to. And
Right.
so that's where, like, when people question your capacity, that I have to be really mindful of. But I also have come to a place where I'm like, okay, if everyone is saying that, and then I'm also experiencing this from a health lens, let me now reconsider and let me now take a deeper understanding of what is actually transpiring. Even though it feels good and it feels freeing in that moment, it doesn't mean that it's healthy for me. And so
Right.
I just appreciate that you're sharing this openly, that people are able to now grasp hold of something beautiful. And it's also an invitation for them to do the deeper work. And sometimes the deeper work is with a doctor, and that is
Yep.
okay. I literally just gave blood this morning before voting. So I've been on a
Yep.
mission, and it's not even 11 o'clock. But
Yep.
let's get into these other pieces that I spoke about at the beginning, because our friendship is important to me, and it's not something that we tap into daily, weekly, sometimes monthly, probably more quarterly, that we see each other.
Yeah.
And so friendship being such a profound piece of who God is. Talk to me
Mhm.
about the kind of the investigation that you're doing around friendship, and the writing and the reflecting that you're doing, because that's your next book. But
Yeah.
let's talk about it, because I know that friendship, and especially friendship and entrepreneurship, can be interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and I've been noodling on this for over a year now, mostly because coming off of the pandemic, I really, like, had just, like, this profound, like, aha moment,
Mhm.
and I wanna, like, add the caveat to this because I'm not slamming on anyone. This is just merely an observation, and I get that it changes for everyone and that everyone's in their own circumstance, so
Mhm, mhm.
caveat.
Caveat, got
Um,
it.
there we
Noted.
go. Um, but I feel like in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, we saw this influx of online communities. We
Yeah,
saw those numbers go sky high. I mean, we had to, right? Like,
yeah,
that's how we had to meet,
totally,
how we had to
totally.
engage with one another was online.
Mhm.
Um, but I'd argue to say people are more lonely now than ever before.
Yeah.
And so that makes me think that online communities are not the solution.
Mm.
They are a
Mhm.
option,
Mhm.
an option, but they are not the option. They are not what we were designed for. And I work a lot with our lovely Gen Zers. And the biggest reason that they say that they show up every Thursday night to our young adult service is for the community,
Yeah.
is for that in-person one-on-one time. And it really got me thinking that, like, no one knows how to be a good friend.
Mm.
We're not
Mm.
taught how to be a good friend.
Yeah.
We're not taught how to be intentional with one another. It's really done by trial and error. And we learn by being a good person, but being a good person within yourself doesn't make you a good person for other people. We
Mm.
love differently. We communicate differently. We have different, like, interests, and we have to learn to adapt to those. Anyone who's married knows this,
Yes.
right? But right? Marriage is a crash course on
Yes,
this.
completely.
But hopefully you have friendships that precede your marriage.
Yeah.
And it's in those that you really need to learn to be a better person for the people around you and to be a better friend to those people. And so that's kind of why I, like, went down the rabbit hole of friendship, because I'm like, we're not doing something right. Like, red flags all over the place. We're
Yeah.
not doing something right.
Yeah.
And when I do a new project or something, people ask me why a lot of the time, of like, why do I write about this? Why do I speak about this? Why am I passionate about this? And my answer is because I see a gap that is
Yeah.
missing and I try to fill it.
Mm.
And sometimes I don't want to fill it. For example, with my podcast, I've had that idea for 5 years plus, 5 plus years. I started it last year because
Yep.
I was waiting for someone else to fill that gap. And then no one else filled that gap. And so I was like, okay, I
God's like,
guess I
"It's
will.
you, it's you."
Right,
9 to
right.
5
And
Faith, by
so
the way. Shout out to 9 to 5 Faith podcast. You guys gotta
yes.
tune in.
Yes. And so same with friendship of
Yeah.
like, hey, no one is really speaking about biblical friendship and what
Yeah.
that looks like and how we can be good friends to each other and what it means to truly support one another.
Mhm.
And then also like having an open hand with it of like sometimes your friendships have seasons.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's like, we need to be saying that that's okay because it is.
Yeah.
That sometimes friendships come and go, and that's
Yeah.
all right as is.
Yeah. I'm trying even to teach that to like my young kids now so that they can understand that and not feel shame or resentment or regret around what happens when a season shifts, whether they're shifting schools, whether they're shifting sports. It could be a zip code that they're shifting and things just fall out of touch. And that is our reality. And yet, especially because of the digital world that we live in, we're anticipating like, oh, we're ride or dies, like we're in this forever. And that's
Right.
less of a child thing because they don't have that kind of connection point yet because they don't have devices yet. But for me as an adult, I can feel that way, even in the segment of entrepreneurship and the different kind of communities, I'll quote unquote, that I've gotten invested in for just a duration of time that then I evolved from, or I was like, I don't really have the capacity for this in this season. And so I shift out from, and people feel like you left them. And you're
Yeah.
like, no, like I love you. I just am in a new mastermind now, or I am just
Right.
doing something different. But to your thought and to your truth, which I really am connected to right now, especially in this season of life that I'm in, I had been asked this particular question from two different people, one of which I was just newly getting to know, and one who has been walking out my journey for the last 8 years. So they've seen me in the wallows of a valley, and then they saw me in what they would perceive as mountaintops and things that were going really amazing. And I'm traveling all over the country, and then they're now seeing me in this scale back space of also feeling like I'm in a valley again. And the question was this: the question was, who do you confide in as friends that you feel safe with? And that confiding word is a very different layer of friendship. It's like
Mhm.
Jesus with the 5,000, Jesus with the 300, Jesus with the 12 or the 70, the Jesus with the 12, and then Jesus with the 3. Who do you think he
Mhm.
confided in? He didn't
Mhm.
confide in the 5,000. He didn't
Right.
confide in anyone besides those really intimate relationships. And for me, Paige, so much of my stuff is done online that
Right.
my friendships, and I'm air quoting here, are all over the place. And
Right.
yet, where does my confiding actually happen? Usually
Right.
confidings happen on a couch.
Yeah.
Usually they happen in your home. Usually
Right.
they happen when someone can knock on your door and come and give you that big mama bear hug that I need from you, right?
Right.
Rather than I'll hug you through the phone or
Yeah.
let's have a Zoom conversation. Yes, those things can work, especially if you have family near and far and friends near and far, but
Right.
I am finding in this season, the friendships that I'm valuing most are the ones that I can sit around a fire with, which I
Yeah.
literally just did last week for my birthday. Just sat around a
Love that.
fire, received prophetic word, received words of encouragement, and we need more of that. So
Yeah.
take us on a journey as you've come into these revelatory experiences and even conversations with other people. What do you believe, or have you found that biblical friendship is versus what people are calling maybe online follows or friends?
Yes. And I actually just had a conversation with this gal named Jan on her podcast, and she was saying how the confusion around friends and followers, like
Mhm.
having like saying friends on social media, right? That has kind
Right.
of distorted our
Oh,
minds a little bit to thinking what friendship is.
yeah.
And to your point, you can have very strong intentional friendships online. I have many of them. I'd actually argue to say I have more online friendships than I do in-person
Yes.
friendships, but I do have in-person friendships. And this gives a sneak peek to what I'm writing, but I'm happy to do it. Speaking of biblical friendship, there's this story, and forgive me, it's in the Gospels. That's about as specific as
Okay.
I can
That's
get.
good. That's good.
It's in the Gospels, and it's the story of the paralyzed man, and
Mhm.
his friends lower him into the roof in order to meet Jesus in an overcrowded house. And I have really leaned into that story to ask the question, who's carrying your mat?
Mm. So
Who
good.
are the people around you who will carry you,
Mm.
push you through a roof
Mm.
in order to meet Jesus.
Praise
Who
God.
are those people
Mm.
around you? And a lot of that, like, I really hope and pray that the people listening to this have those people. But if you don't have those people, how can you go and foster those relationships with a lot of with others?
Yeah.
And I say this like with such a soft heart because I realize that everyone has their own seasons that they're going through and that like friendship is not always easy. However, I would say one of the biggest weaknesses that our culture has is the ability to consistently show up for other people.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that is where we lack.
Mhm.
And so I would encourage people to say, if I want that from other people, am I being that for them?
Yeah. It's good.
Um, of course, you have to keep in mind like toxic relationships and unhealthy relationships and abuse and all of that other
Yeah,
stuff.
drama.
Well,
Little
right.
baby.
Like that comes with it of like friends like taking advantage of you, right? That's
Totally.
a whole other thing.
Yeah, totally.
But are you showing up for your friends how you want them to show up for you?
Yeah.
And that consistency element is that's the sticking point.
Yeah.
That's the really
Yeah.
hard point. I'll give you an example. So I am in so many different like group chats
Yeah.
and Instagram chats and all that stuff with so many people.
Yeah.
I'd probably argue to say like north of 100
Right.
cumulatively,
Yeah.
north of 100 people who I talk to about business, about writing, and everything.
Sure. Sure.
And I asked everyone, I said, hey, and like the premise of these is let's support one another, let's cheer each other on, let's
Mhm.
help each other out,
Completely. Community over competition.
right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Great.
Yep.
And I really try to show up for people in that
Yeah.
way in those groups. Not saying that I am the be all, but
Yeah.
like
Of
I'll
course.
show up and I'll like do free social media coaching or
Yep.
I'll have free consults with people just because like I like to
Yeah.
help people and that's how I can show up best. Like
Yeah.
that's the skills God gave
Yep.
me. So that's how I try to show up in these groups. And I sent around this I don't even want to call it a survey because it really
Okay.
wasn't a survey. It was a question. A
Okay.
question, one
Uh-huh. One. Okay,
question
got it. Got it.
of read this and give me your feedback.
Yep.
That's all it was.
Okay.
Hundreds of people in these groups. I got 3 responses.
Wow.
And then I went to my young adult girls and
Mhm.
I texted them and I said, "Hey guys, I need a favor from you. Can
Yep.
you go in and can you just read this and then just fill it out for me?" They said,
Yep.
"Of course." And every single person I sent it to sent it back.
So good.
And that just goes to show that like real intentional relational
Mhm.
effort that it
Yeah.
takes in order to really foster those deep relationships and relationships that are will consistently show up for you.
Yeah, and they take the pause on something that's important to you as well, right? Versus,
Mhm.
we're actually seeing this interestingly in the publishing house, and it's a weird analogy comparative to this, but we've got our devotional, and then we've got our a book that's like entrepreneurial.
Mhm.
And we found that the cohort of devotional women, specifically it's a women's devotional for that one, um, they are sisters. Like they are
Mm.
connected. They support each other. They're doing the cross collaborations. They're doing that. They're establishing friendship out of their story versus the entrepreneurial side where it's more of a checkbox selfishly for them to move
Mhm.
into the next bracket or arena or bio statement or whatever. And they're great people, love them to death.
Yeah.
Individually have really great relationships with many of them. But when it comes to opening up capacity to have, Zoom calls, 15-minute chats or whatever that is with these other people, there's not the same symmetry. There's not the same desire. Now, these
Yeah.
are online communities that we're referencing. Then I go to my church family and we have an invitation out to, let's say it's a birthday party, let's say it's a family gathering, let's say we had a girlfriend whose daughter got baptized, like, and we don't like hang out with them every single week other than church, but the entire community shows up for
Yeah.
those types of investments because we think, wow, one, they're right here in our local community. If I was to ask something so intimately, like come to my daughter's baptism, I would hope that the people who champion my daughter would be there, even if they weren't people that I connected with. And so that goes back to the reflection on what kind of friend do I want to be?
Yeah.
And if we brought friendship into entrepreneurship more often, I think our businesses would look really different. And
Yeah.
I think our lives would look really different. We wouldn't have this sense, especially socially, digitally, of a friend that's not really a friend who doesn't even comment when you're literally asking them directly to help you comment on something.
Right. Right.
So I do think that it's a human desire, it's a core need for us to be seen, known, and loved. And people
Yeah.
talk about that. That's how you establish a social media, presence, right? Make people
Yeah.
feel seen, known, and loved. But are we doing that deeply or are we doing that surfacely? And I
Yeah.
think there'd be a lot of people who could probably go to the fact that it's been done surfacely because that's what it's been taught.
Yeah. And as you were telling the two examples of each book group, I was trying to think. I was thinking through like why would that be the case?
Yeah.
What is the tendency there? What is the heart issue? And I think that it is kind of the baked into a devotional
Yeah.
or something spiritual growth that you're going to the expectation is there for emotional vulnerability.
Yeah.
Whereas, emotional vulnerability fosters connection, right? We
Sure.
we
Sure.
know that is
Yes.
fact,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Whereas for entrepreneurs, there is no buy-in for
Mhm.
their emotional vulnerability, and so therefore, like their engagement might not be there 100%.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
what I was like kind of noodling on while you
Yeah,
were
it's
saying that. I was,
interesting 'cause
yeah,
their works are very testimonial driven, so maybe just
yeah,
not the layer of emotional vulnerability isn't there, but they are sharing hard things, but it's hard things that are forward facing, if that
yeah,
makes sense, versus
yeah,
hard things that usually happen behind closed doors
yeah,
is where the devotional piece is coming to play, so that's interesting,
yeah.
something I wanna noodle with. I love that you say that
Yeah.
myself. Okay, so you mentioned this when we were talking about at the beginning around friendship, and you mentioned marriage, and the
Mhm.
connectivity of us giving and receiving is very different, specifically love. And
Yes.
I want to make sure that we make time for this because I know in the intro I stated it, and I want people to have access to this. The book that you're currently writing is
Yeah.
around physical touch, specifically the sexualization of physical touch. Is that
Yeah.
accurate?
That's
Tell me
100%.
the juicy details because this is way
Yes.
up my alley when it comes to my testimony.
Yes. So I will start with a story. So I was talking to this woman and I was telling her about this book. And she said, "You know what, Paige? Every time I go to church, I always go and I seek out the widows. They all sit together and I go give them a big hug because I'm tearing up
Yeah.
because they have been without hugs. They have been without physical affection because they no longer have their spouse, in this case, their husbands. Um, and of course, that blew my my concept of what I was writing way open,
Wow.
because it like was like, hey, you're not speaking to the people who like just have physical
Mm,
touch as a love language. You're also speaking to the people who don't have it in their life.
good.
So there was that.
Love that.
But this idea in this book and this concept really was born out of like my personal testimony, and again to what I was saying earlier. If I see something that doesn't exist, I'll try to make it into existence. And
Yeah.
so this book is really the book that I wish that I had when I was, in college and forming these really formative relationships. Because I feel like as a Christian culture, we do not talk about non-sexual touch
Yeah. It's true.
at all.
Yeah. Mm,
And it's not that we just like do a bad job of how we talk about it. Like I would think like purity. Yeah, we talk about
sure.
purity. We kind
Sure.
of do like a not so great job at it, but, like, we're
Yeah,
still talking about it generally.
totally.
I did not have, like, a tumultuous relationship with that conversation like some other people did,
Yep.
like, I still got the gist of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but when it comes to touch, this it was always this conversation of, like, just deal with it when you get married
Mm.
kinda thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is the people who aren't married, there are people who are divorced, there are people who are choosing to be single for their life. And shocker here, guys, surprise, these issues don't go away once you're married.
No, they
Like
don't. They don't, they
at
don't, they
all.
don't. Yeah, that's
I
so
think
good.
that's like a really big misconception of like, hey, these issues just like get completely
So good.
resolved once you get married. That is not
Yeah.
true. That is a lie. Um,
It's true. You're
and
so right.
so
But again, where are people talking about that?
right, they're
They're
not.
not. Yeah.
And so it is this whole conversation because I know that there's people who talk about sex and intimacy and physical
Yes.
intimacy and like that within a marriage and what that looks like, which is great.
Mhm.
Props to them. That's not
Mhm.
my conversation to have. I don't
Mhm.
feel necessarily particularly equipped or
Yeah.
called to have that conversation. My conversation is a little bit wider than that.
Yeah.
And that is how you can receive physical touch in a God honoring way.
Mm.
And that excludes sexual intimacy sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. And that's between people of the same gender and people that are boy girl? Or are you specifically leaning into the like a relational intimacy?
Oh, this is just
In general.
generally
Okay,
in
that's what I
general.
thought. Okay, that's what I
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah.
Because
This
I'm
is in
thinking
general.
I told you about how I feel when you hug me, and then you
Yeah.
mentioned the woman to the widow. So I wanted to be clear that
Yeah.
those who are listening, this really is across the board. And
Yeah.
interestingly, Paige, I share this often, but one of the retreats that I hosted, I had zero idea that it was even possible until a couple of days in. I had the revelation that 12 out of 12 of the women there had been sexually abused.
Hmm.
Had zero, that was not the premise of the event,
Right.
nothing, but it was
Yeah.
as people were sharing and I came into this awareness and I just thought, like, my heart just broke. And I
Mm.
think that doesn't necessarily have to be somebody's root for them not to have, an awareness or an ability to receive or give physical touch in that safe, parameter, but
Yeah.
it's something that's notable for the amount of people who have had or been scorned by some sort of physical touch scenario, even if you wouldn't call it sexual abuse, right?
Right.
Or lack
Yeah.
thereof. Like I
Absolutely.
know men who've never been hugged by their father. And I'm like,
Right.
what? That literally doesn't make sense to me. But we
Yeah.
lived in a family that hugged. Like you
Yeah.
hug if you're mad at each other, you hug to say sorry. You have to hug, even though you might not
Yeah.
want to in those moments. But like talk to us about what that revelation has been.
Yeah. And I will add, it is developmentally unhealthy to
Mhm.
not have touch in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is harmful. Not only is it like helpful to have it, it is harmful not to have
Mhm.
it.
So good.
Like just
Yeah.
how our bodies are created. And that's kind of what I talk about in the book is like God created our bodies. He created our bodies to operate in a certain way. And when we are hugged, we get hormones in our
Yeah.
brain is released.
Yep.
Our nervous system can calm down. There's this is a really easy example because a lot of people can like picture it when I say about it is like babies being held when they were just born. It helps them develop when you're holding them. It helps
Yep.
their blood pressure. It helps their
Mhm.
heart rate. It helps their immune system. It also helps the
Yeah.
mother get over postpartum. It helps her produce more milk. It helps with bonding. Like,
Mhm.
I just want to
Mhm.
set the stage there that it is a physical necessity to
Yes.
be touched.
Right. And at what point do we think if it happens at birth, just like the Genesis, right?
Right,
Everything has to be from that space and that perspective. At what age do we think, oh, they don't need that anymore? Is it because they're
right,
a teenager and they're like going through body changes and it's just awkward? Mom, don't kiss me in public or hold my hand. That doesn't mean they don't need it. And so I
right.
do think it's also this like cognitive pursuit as people, as humanity. It doesn't have to be a mom to a child, but just like knowing that there are so many people who just need a hug. I think
Yeah,
about that for the homeless,
yeah,
like people who are literally don't have family, their need for just being hugged. Like, yes, they need to be seen, but like that I just know how much I love a good hug. And so
Right.
I hope that of all the things you're listening to on this episode, like you just know that like go hug someone today. Like that is a love language it's missed. And
Yeah.
most of the time, like you said, there's just this idea of sexualization connected to it.
Yeah, and also, like, that it has to be in romantic relationship.
Correct.
And I was gonna say relationship, but, like, I know that, like, runs the spectrum that some people,
Totally.
like, might not be super comfortable with, and, like, that's fine for you.
Yeah.
You get to define what this is for yourself, and that's, like, the beauty of it.
Yeah.
But part of the book is, like, I want to give you all the tools that are
Mm,
all available for you, and to your point with people who have had sexual trauma or,
mm,
have had some kind of, distortion over their physical intimacy or physical relationship. This is like not the book to heal that, but this might be a book for the next step of that. Of
yeah.
like,
Good.
okay, you're like, I'm healed, but like, how do I move forward
That's
in
good.
terms of like defining this for myself?
It's really good.
Um, and the reason why I like have the hard time saying like this is just for like female best friends with each other, like
Yeah.
because I recognize that this might not be like, that might not be accessible to everyone,
Yeah.
right? Or, like, our friendships or our family, like, that is not always an accessible place. I know with, like,
Yeah.
my family, sorry, family, we're not a very touchy-feely family. We're just
Yeah.
not. Which, like, Paige, how did you become like this? Because, like, I'll go hug a tree, like,
I
easily.
love it.
But, like, my family's not, and so, like, they would not necessarily be a resource for me to, like, go and hug,
Sure.
or go get that physical affection for.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think of, like, my massage therapist. He's a dude
Yep.
because I like some good elbow, like, in my back.
The
I
big,
need that every
strong
now.
hand.
Right. But like getting a massage, if you are really starved for
Mhm.
that physical affection and you can't get it from a relationship, you can't get it from a friendship or a family relationship, like you have community resources that you can go seek out in order for you to get that physical touch in your
Mm,
life.
what a good idea. Yeah, that's so true. I
Personal
hadn't thought about
trainer,
that.
I have a
Yeah.
list. Go cuddle
I know,
puppies
I'm
at
like,
the
"Who else?"
pound.
Who else? I'm like, "This is good. This is great."
Yeah. Go cuddle puppies at the pound. They need people to play with puppies.
It's
Go do
so
that.
good. Well, and I think too, we've alluded to the hug piece, but there's a gal that I like watches my kiddos and is like really just loved on them since they were little. And she is a reborn artist. I don't know if you've ever heard of the reborn
I have
community.
not.
It's basically like these baby dolls that are, I mean, wildly realistic. I
Gotcha,
mean, it'll
gotcha.
freak you out, okay?
Hyper-realism.
Oh my
Gotcha.
gosh. And she will put hair plugs in them, eyelashes. I mean, you can see the skin on the little newborn's like fingers coming up. I mean, it's bananas. But they
Yeah.
actually use these dolls in a therapy perspective for women who have dementia or have lost a
Mm,
child.
yeah,
And they literally, like you said about the babies, they're giving these people weighted children that look real. They can't
mhm.
trust them because they might drop them because of their age. But like
Right.
literally, it is allowing all of those chemical imbalances that you're talking about to come into alignment. And it doesn't have to be a hug, it could be a hold, it could be a handheld, it could
Yeah,
be like a conversation that just happened with my husband and my sister recently, where like he was telling her something hard and she just put her hand on like the back of his arm. And
yeah,
he said it just made him feel so safe in that moment. And
yeah,
I'm like, wow, like I wouldn't have thought to do that. But those are the things that matter. If someone's crying or they're at a table and you're across them and you put your hands on their hands, right?
yeah,
It's like, oh, like there's something about it that is lost. Going back to our friendship conversation, if
right.
we think that the only way to connect or that our only real invested friendships are through a screen.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like when we have this conversation, when I talk to people about this book, they're like, "Hey, can you write that book for my husband?"
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's the misunderstanding a lot of the times with
Oh,
men specifically
good.
and their ability to interpret physical signals the same way that women do.
Yeah.
I won't go as far as saying like men and women's sex drives are different. I don't
Sure.
think they are. I think the way we interpret
Mm,
things
yeah.
emotionally is different.
That's good. Yeah.
Actually, that's like fact. Like our
Yeah.
brains are
Yeah.
like built different structurally.
Yeah.
Um, and I can nerd out about this. I don't know again, something else people might not know about me. I have my master's in psychology. So I like
So good.
absolutely nerd out about physiology in the brain and all of that
So
stuff.
good. Oh my gosh, this is great.
But when it comes to like having that spousal or like romantic relationship, I will say, and my husband's fine with me talking about this. It's in the book. We're good.
Yeah.
But like at the beginning of our marriage, this was something that like we had a bit of a sticking point around,
Yeah.
is because like I would like just want all the touch like a koala to like the
Yes.
tree, like just holding on, just because that's how I operate and that's my love language and
Yeah.
everything. And when I would go and do that, he'd be like, "Not right now, honey."
Mhm.
Because he was interpreting those efforts, those like
Right.
those I won't even say advances, but me doing
Sure.
those things, he was interpreting that as like, "Oh, like she's trying to initiate sex."
Yes. That's
Absolutely not
so good.
not
Yeah.
happening, like,
Yeah.
that's not what was happening, but that was the interpretation that was coming along,
Mm.
and so I think that this book will also be a really
Good.
good, bridge to
Yeah.
get or a really good bridge to help close this gap, around how we talk about touch, and,
Mhm.
like, being like, "Hey, dudes, like, just because she wants touch doesn't necessarily mean she wants sex."
Yeah, it's a
And hey,
different thing.
women,
Yeah.
yeah, and hey, women, like you can go seek this out without having the expectation of sex on your plate.
Yeah, that's so good. I feel like there's just a lot of opportunity for healing through the
Yeah.
message in general. And you're right. I literally don't know anyone who's having this conversation. So, way to go, God, for
Yeah.
revealing this to you and for you being obedient to say yes. This really is a movement. I don't know if we'll call it the physical touch movement because that might have some other thoughts. We'll have to come up with another name, but I'm sure you've done that,
I
which
can
is
give you my working title.
yeah. Let's hear it. Can we hear it? I love
So it's
working titles.
reclaiming touch,
Ah,
which
that's
actually like speaks to
good.
kind of what you were going for. But yeah,
Yes,
reclaiming
that's
touch is the working
so
title,
good. That's
which
beautiful.
is, what we're talking about of like
Yes,
reclaiming it as your own and like
yes.
having ownership over that and being able to decide for
Mm,
yourself what that looks like. And like, again, it's just pursuing it in a God honoring way.
yeah, that feels so pure in not the purity stance, but like you said, just
Right.
feels like so wholesome to like an engagement for people whose physical touch is the last thing on their love language. If you guys have never read the five love languages, that's one of the references we're sharing around Gary Chapman's book. But I really believe that there's a lot of healing and purity that can come that people will be able to be exposed by. And just thinking about that, I think there's like a statistic, and I might get it wrong, but it's like you need 11 hugs a day to like
Yeah.
calm your nervous system or something to that
Yeah.
extent. And there are
It's
days
like the
I'll literally
minimum.
count, right? I'll literally
Yeah.
count and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I've only had 3 hugs today. And
Yeah.
I will seek after, like run after my children when they come in the door, just hold me, just hug me. And they're like, what are you doing, mama? But then other days they need those hugs. And so
Yeah.
for us to be cognizant of that, we talk about boundaries, we talk about all these other things, we talked about hustle
Yeah.
earlier. Like we also need to understand what are the things then that suffice, like that's restful, like physical
Yeah.
touch in this healthy way. Talk about hands and mind, like hands and heart, like that is a beautiful way to execute rest in our
Yeah,
lives
and
daily.
yeah, and luckily enough, my husband and I both work from home full
Oh,
time, so we're,
okay.
like, always around each other.
Yes.
We have our boundaries of, like, I have a door on my office, he needs
Yes.
to get a door on his office, but every now and then, like, I will go into his office and be like, "Hey, do you have, like, 5 minutes?"
Aw,
And we will just go sit on the couch next to each other.
aw,
Like, it
that's so
doesn't have to
good.
be some big production, it
Yeah,
doesn't
that's
have to be like, of course, like, 11 hugs, yes, great,
yes.
I will never say no to hugs, but, like, even if it's just like, "Hey, can I have,
That's
like,
good.
5 minutes just to, like, sit next to you and be,
Mhm.
like, touching you or holding your hand or, like,
Yeah.
snuggled in your lap," which I also do a lot of,
Yeah.
but yeah, there are so many different ways that we can do this and, like, overcome the shame that is
Yeah.
associated with needing these things in our life.
That right there, that is a whole chapter. Whole chapter.
Next episode.
Next episode. Man, honestly, Paige, I haven't had this long of an episode in months. I really haven't. It's been really sticking to like this 35-minute mark, 40-minute mark. And I was just like, this is so good. And it's fueling my soul. And I know that it's been long overdue. And so I know it's going to bless people. You guys have got to get connected to all things Paige Clark. You know where the links are. They're in the show notes, all of that. Paige, where would you say you hang out the most on social media if they do want to get connected in a digital
Yeah.
way?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram, but I am everywhere, much to my dismay. But
Yeah,
I'm mostly on Instagram, and I'd even go say as far as to say I have a bestie group chat. Going back to the friendship thing, right?
love
I have a
it.
bestie group chat channel on my Instagram, so I would
Ooh,
love if you guys join that. One thing that again, future conversation here.
yes, yes.
But one thing that I'm super passionate about and that I try to do in how I show up in this world is like three basic things. And they're the pillars of friendship, in my
Mm,
opinion. And it's being real and honest with people, connecting with people, and then also having some fun. So if
mm,
you join that group chat, you will get all three things. You will get some
so
throat
good.
punches, as I call them. You will get some laughs because I post all my funny memes in there. And also we'll just get some things that warm your heart a little bit.
I love that. And it's so needed. And you're right. The connectivity of laughter. I really feel like that should be a love language.
Yes.
Humor. It's not on the list. I guess like maybe words could be, but it's not the same. I
Yeah.
love laughing with people. I love adventuring with people. So the having fun piece
Yes.
is critical as a family value, as a root system value.
Yes. And
Paige,
every Monday on
yeah.
my stories, I post the funniest memes
I
from
have,
the day.
I need to look at this. I don't think I've
Oh, it's
seen
my
this.
favorite thing. It's my favorite thing. And people are like sending me memes all the time, like, hey, post this on Monday. But it's your Monday pick me up. And I just post the funniest
Oh,
stuff that I find
that's
on the
good.
internet. I have like a folder on my Instagram that's like all the ones that are like a little like pushing the boundary
Too
of
much.
appropriateness. I might do something like
I
that,
love it. I love it.
but
You
they're
should.
mostly PG.
Okay, okay. Keep it noted, noted. But I love this. And you guys, as you can tell, she really is. I got a warm cup of tea right before I came, but that's really Paige's heart. She's just like a warm cup of tea. And I am so grateful to have you around and excited for these books to release, excited for the work you're doing in the world. Make sure if you do need social media support, branding support, any of those things, Paige is your girl. But also if you're just looking for a friend, she's got the community for you. All right. I love you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been good. So good.